Hello, everyone. I just realized I forgot to put my mic right in front of me. Welcome to Resistance Live for the 28th of August, 2025. We have to talk about what happened at the CDC last night. I know many of you have been following it, and I am simultaneously not surprised and also just completely disgusted. And it ties in very closely to the updated COVID regulations for vaccines that are coming up, along with other vaccine recommendations for kids. So we have to talk about that, and we have a whole bunch of other things we have to talk about. There's an update about Lisa Cook, the governor, one of the governors of the Fed, and I was asked to comment on yesterday's school shooting in Minneapolis, which I'm going to do briefly. So lots to cover today, among other things. For those who are new here, my name is Elizabeth Cronise McLaughlin. I'm an ex-Wall Street and human rights lawyer and a lifelong activist. For the last 15 years, I have been consulting with leaders and impact-related folks, including people who are running for office, about how they can create the best and biggest progressive change possible in these times. So welcome. Today, for our visually challenged viewers, I haven't done this in a few days. Sorry, you guys. I'm wearing a cream-colored sweater, and I'm a pink-skinned, green-eyed, dirty, blonde-haired woman. My hair is pulled back today, and I'm coming to you from occupied Muncie, Lenape, and Mohican land. Okay. Last night, late last night, we started to get word of a series of resignations and what initially looked like a firing at the Centers for Disease Control. And so I need to give you guys a little bit of a background on this, because yesterday, as many of you may have heard, revised COVID vaccine guidelines came out for this fall. There are going to be new COVID boosters this fall, but you are now only allowed to get them if you meet a certain set of criteria. And those include things that have been now deemed by the CDC to be like high risk. Okay. Well, I'm going to let you all in on a little secret here. This means very bad things for kids, because in most instances, healthy kids will now not be able to get the shot. I myself am already thinking about, whether or not it's worth getting my kids a booster, even if it's the old booster, because I think it's been a year since we had one. We did flu and booster shots for COVID at the same time last year. But I will also just mention that if you're not a former smoker, you are now. And so why am I telling you that? Because if you don't meet any of the other qualifying criteria, one of the criteria now for getting a COVID shot, if you were under the age of 65, is that you are a current or former smoker. So I just want to make something very clear. This is really only about what you might tell a doctor. So you do need to actually consult with your physician about this, because there may be physicians out there who kind of assume that pretty much everybody meets one of these qualifying conditions. I don't know. We'll see. But, I will just say that as somebody who quit smoking at the age of 26, almost 30 years ago now, 28 years ago now, I'm still a former smoker, and I intend to get my booster. So it is really critical that you pay attention to how this has been rolled out. But there are also indications that the CDC is planning on making changes to the vaccine schedule recommendations for kids. Now, there has been a conflict in the last couple of weeks between what the CDC has been recommending and what the FDA has been trying to put into place. Health and Human Services have been trying to put into place. And this may be, we don't know yet, where the origin story of what happened last night began. So I have to tell you guys something. The CDC director, who was appointed by Trump, has only been in office for a month, okay? And she is somebody who, when she entered office, people really didn't think, well, she's somebody who's going to kind of hold the line when it comes to some of the crazier things that RFK Jr. is deciding to do. She is the first CDC director ever to not actually be a doctor. She is a researcher. She is an infectious disease researcher, okay? But apparently, what RFK Jr. has now tried to do is a step too far for her, okay? So the way that this went down yesterday is, first, it was announced on social media that she was out. Her lawyer, Mark Zaid, who many of you may remember represents an enormous number of whistleblowers, and actually also a lot of my friends, he's Olivia Troy's lawyer, represents a lot of people who've gone up against the Trump administration, put out a statement that their client, the CDC director, had not been fired and had no plans to leave. So this was very reminiscent of the first Trump administration, where, he would fire people by tweet. This seems to have been something kind of quite similar. However, in the immediate time zone of that, we also learned that two senior officials at the CDC had quit. And they wrote scathing resignation letters. Like, I don't think I've ever read resignation letters from public officials that read like this. One of them said, I am the grandson of someone in Greece who stood up to fascism and lost his life. And I am not quitting because of the recent shooting at the CDC building in Atlanta. I am quitting because I owe it to my grandfather to live into his legacy. And that letter then went on to describe the way in which the data at the CDC is being artificially manipulated to reach political aims. That in essence, this is the allegation, like you're reading between the lines, but that RFK Jr. and the anti-vax crew that have been brought in are essentially misreading intentionally and misreporting intentionally the data on vaccination. And so all of this, and Deborah Haddon, who was the other person who quit, wrote an equally pointed resignation letter that directed all of her ire and the basis for her quitting at the current leadership of Health and Human Services. So there's no question here that there has come a moment now where everything that RFK Jr. is trying to implement and that Trump is backing him up on has crossed a line over which the leadership of the CDC is not willing to go. And again, I have to point out that the CDC director herself is a Trump nominee. All right. So what do we take? Oh, and by the way, then later on last night, she was fired directly by Donald Trump. So, all of this, and that doesn't mean she's not going to file a lawsuit because she might, but all of this points to something that we should all be aware of, which is that what I keep thinking about is "You in Danger, Girl." You know that famous quote from the movie. I think it was from Ghost. I can't remember, but it's it's that moment where the threat to public health is so great, like so great, that even the Trump sycophants who he put into place have said, we can't abide this. And, that in and of itself speaks volumes, right? So, I said to everybody right after the election last year, and many of you who were here will recall this, that this was not the moment to put off any vaccinations or preventative care. In fact, that if you were behind on any of that shit, you were over 50 and you hadn't gotten your shingles vax, you were somebody who had not gotten your pneumonia vaccine, you hadn't had a mammogram in a couple of years, like now was the time to go get it. And in fact, we had somebody in this very audience who had not gotten a mammogram for several years and was diagnosed with breast cancer and is now being treated as a result of having done that, okay? Like followed the recommendation with the warning that this kind of stuff was in the pipeline as soon as Trump took office. But the thing that I am the most concerned about here, honestly, as a result of this, is that it's very clear that if folks follow the new CDC guidelines, that they're the new FDA guidelines that they're trying to put out with regard to vaccination, not only will children die because they will not receive the vaccinations that have historically been recommended on the historically recommended schedule because of this insane conspiracy theory bullshit about vaccinations causing autism and all this other crap. Like there was a quote from RFK Jr. yesterday, I think, by the way, about him walking through an airport and being able to recognize in children that their mitochondria was messed up because they were looking at phones and playing video games. I mean, we have a crackpot. I think we all knew this. This is one reason why everybody was fighting so hard at his nomination hearings. But we have a crackpot in charge of the nation's health, like truly devastating scenarios here. And people are going to die as a result. I just have to remind you all, right? Like we lost more than a million Americans during the heart of the COVID pandemic, which, by the way, is not over. Okay. If we eliminate booster shots that include protection for new variants, God help us all. Because what they're essentially recommending is that we go back to a state of affairs where the vast majority of the American public do not have access to vaccines that will protect them from additional virulent variations of COVID-19. And in addition to the fact that it's just shocking, it's also so profoundly amoral that I find it hard to even justify any theory that would abide by this, right? And that's not to mention that they're like questioning the validity of the flu vaccine and other things now that that we've all just come to rely on now for decades, right? I'm just going to remind everybody there is still an ongoing measles outbreak in Texas. Children have died. It has happened in a pocket of Texas where anti-vax theories have taken hold tremendously among parents of young children. And you know, that's not including all of the various ailments that vaccines have essentially wiped out until recently, like polio in the United States, right? So this is something to be very aware of in terms of your own health decisions, first and foremost. But I also just want to remind everybody that this is a moment, and, you know, there are lots of people who are like, impeach RFK Jr. So let me just say one thing. Impeachment is not happening now. And honestly, I would much rather, if you're going to call your reps, which you should, your reps and your senators, to advocate about this state of affairs, you should be calling for investigations, okay? Because here's why. It's a lot easier to start an investigation on the Hill than it is to impeach a sitting member of this administration when the House and the Senate are under the control of Republicans. An investigation is something different, okay? And you might be able to find a committee where there's enough people to like ask questions, to pull people in and ask them to testify under oath, to start that ball rolling until perhaps, if we're lucky, and we do all the right things on responsive gerrymandering, and we manage to win a few voting rights court cases, we might take back the House in 2026. Okay, we're still not going to be able to remove him because we're like, based on the fact that only a third of the Senate is up in 2026, it's going to be virtually impossible for us to have the 2/3 majority that we would need. We'd have to win like literally every single seat, and even then it wouldn't be enough because, you know, there are some Democrats who are up for re-election in the Senate. We will not have the votes to remove him. Okay, barring unforeseen circumstances. You all know I say here, like, we never know what's going to happen. But the call right now should be for investigations into what is happening inside the Department of Health and Human Services with regard to the protection of national health. Okay, that is where we really need to start advocating. All right. And I would encourage you to make those calls today, to ask very serious questions about why it is that a Trump appointed official felt the need to say, I'm not leaving, despite the intent of Trump to fire her because of her outrage about the position on vaccination. So very, very key to take that perspective on it. All right. We have an update on Lisa Cook, who, of course, is a member of the Board of Governors for the Federal Reserve. As was signaled earlier in the week, she has now, as of this morning, filed a complaint and a motion for a temporary restraining order, an emergency hearing, to stop Trump from being able to remove her from the Board of Governors. I'm going to remind you all that her term does not expire, I think, until 2036. Like, he is removing her in the middle of her term, or trying to remove her in the middle of her term, in order to take control of the U.S. economy, fundamentally. And we talked yesterday and the day before on this broadcast about how freaking dangerous that is. And so that's something that we absolutely need to watch. Again, I will remind everybody that the Fed put out a statement signaling that they knew that this lawsuit was coming, that they were behind Lisa Cook, that they were not in favor of or supporting or agreeing with Trump's effort to remove her in the middle of her term. And I suspect this is one that she's going to win. I will just remind everybody that even the Supreme Court, in its ruling about my friend Kathy Harris, for instance, who was the chair of the Merit Systems Protection Board, saying that Trump could fire her, said that it's not like this is the Fed. Okay, so the Supreme Court has already signaled that, like, the Fed is a step too far. The Merit Systems Protection Board should have been a step too far, just like the National Labor Relations Board and others. But all that said, there is a statement in a Supreme Court case that says, like, you can't randomly remove people from the Federal Board of Governors. So we will have to see how this one goes. Okay. Couple of other things to talk about today. I was asked to talk about the potential coordination of blue states, both in response to what happened at the CDC and in general. All right. So I have to remind everybody that there is a Democratic Governors Association that is very active. At one point, Gavin Newsom was the chair of it. I think Pritzker is the chair of it now. I may be wrong about that. But that has been an organization that has been operational for like decades, okay? And those folks get together on the phone, right? Like, Democratic governors do, in fact, work together. And also there are direct lines of communication, like, guarantee it, Pritzker, Hochul, Gavin Newsom, governors of other blue states, so to speak, are in regular communication with one another about the ways in which, particularly around this gerrymandering issue, the ways in which that they might be able to work together or individually to fight back against what's happening. Now, I do think that the call by people like Mariam Kaba and others for the states that are the blue states that care about public health, which I hope is all of them, should come together and pool their data and pool their policies, by the way, because there can be state-based vaccine policies also. Not to say that that overrides CDC recommendations, but there can be state-based recommendations by state boards of health that could also provide guidance to doctors in those states, all right? That they should get together and actually start operating as a unit when it comes to public health and other things. I happen to agree with that. I think it's a great idea. I will also just say that, you know, when it comes to the rollout of the National Guard, we have already seen blue states like full stop refuse to participate. We've actually seen a few red states like Tennessee has refused to participate in rolling out its National Guard and has affirmatively told the Trump administration that Memphis does not want him to order the National Guard into that city. So there's some pushback happening in different ways, but there is already some blue state coordination underway. And somebody asked me on the Patreon feed this morning, reminder, please support this broadcast by becoming a paid subscriber over at patreon.com/resistancelive for as little as $5 a month. Helps to keep us afloat. You get to ask questions before every broadcast. You also get weekly bonus broadcasts and all sorts of other goodies. Okay, so I was asked on the Patreon feed this morning what we define as a blue state. So let me just make something clear, okay? A blue state is a state where, you know, you've at the bare minimum got a Democratic governor, all right? Because Democratic governors can set a lot of policy inside their states, even if they can't change the law when the legislatures are in other hands, okay? Of course, what we would deem to be like full blue states would be states where the entire legislature and the governorship is controlled by the Democratic Party, all right? That's California, for instance, okay, among others. One of the things that we have to keep in mind here is that state law varies by state. So in some states, for instance, it's the attorney general who is in charge of certifying elections. In others, it's the secretary of state. And there are various degrees of policy that are available to public elected officials by state law that may vary from state to state. Okay, so for instance, the attorney general of a given state, depending on state law, may be able to make a determination about whether statewide law enforcement is going to be in collaboration with ICE. All right, that may not be true in every state. All right, but one of the things that we have to keep in mind here is that there is enough authority vested with Democratic elected officials that they should be using in this circumstance to whatever extent they can. All right, and that means, by the way, that they need to hear from their constituents. Phone calls to the governor's office, the attorney general's office, to the secretary of state, to your state legislators, both House and Senate. You need to be making those phone calls to demand what you want, all right? Because they will move much quicker if they know that their own constituents are folks who actually care about them taking action against the administration. This is one reason why every time we come on here, I harp so much on local engagement, local participation, making sure you know what's happening at the local and the state level where you live, because a lot of this stuff can be controlled if you have the right elected people in office. Now, Texas is the absolute opposite side of this, where, like, you know, they've engineered the state in such a way that it's very difficult for Democrats to get elected. In that instance, obviously, different forms of resistance need to be employed, okay? But if you live in a state where there are any democratically elected officials with power, like even if they only control like one body of government, like the House or the Senate, you should know who represents you and you should be reaching out to them. Because that kind of advocacy can really be a true backstop. And also it can encourage your governor, in particular, if you happen to have a blue governor, to make sure that they're coalescing with other blue governors to do the right thing. And you can also call and thank them when they have. All right. I was asked to comment on the school shooting in Minneapolis, in part because the right wing has mobilized it yet again as another anti-trans talking point. Okay. I don't actually really want to comment very much on this, because one of the things that drives me crazy every time this happens is that we already know the answers, right? We know that just like every other fascist authoritarian state, this regime will take any crisis as a means to weaponize their power against marginalized people, okay? Nobody should be surprised. In fact, it was predicted by trans activists and public intellectuals the second this happened that they were going to find a reason to blame trans people for this shooting, all right? I'm just going to say one thing. Actually, I'm going to say two things about it. The first is that we already know what the answer is. All right. The reason why this happens so often in the United States is because of easy access to guns, including by people who are mentally ill, by people who have been convicted or accused of domestic violence, by people who already have a history of violence. And that is the largest contributing factor to every single mass shooting in America. That and being radicalized, so to speak, by white supremacist ideologies online. Okay, those are the two biggest predictors. All right. I'm just going to say one other thing about this, though. The media is a complicit factor in this because the way in which these shootings are covered is revolting. Okay, I saw an interview yesterday with a fifth grader. Okay, first of all, I want to know, did that fifth grader's parents give that child permission to speak to a huge swath of media, or did they simply descend on that poor child when he was emerging from the school where his friend's body had saved him from being shot? Like, we need ethics in the way these things are reported, because the sensationalism concerning mass shootings in this country encourages more of the same, okay? When these are not approached with grief and horror, but instead approached as if they are like a mainstream news thing that we all need push notifications on, and oh my God, here's a fifth grader who's got, gunpowder on his neck because he was a foot away from somebody firing an automatic weapon. It encourages those who are seeking to exercise power and violence over others through gun violence to do more of the same. And so I am not interested, and I'm just going to say this here, I'm not interested in covering mass shootings beyond the means by which we need to analyze them in the current socio-political context. And that is because I have no desire to contribute to what makes these things happen more. Okay, so that's all I really want to say about it. And that poor kid, my God. I mean, if you didn't see the interview, I hope you don't, because it's so obvious that child is in shock, and the reporters are down on their hands and knees. This kid is so little that they can't get a mic in front of him without getting down on their knees, and it's a crowd of reporters like stuffing mics into his face. It's disgusting. Like, as a mother, as a parent, as someone who, has played out the worst fears in my own mind 1,000 times about my children in a school environment, that was morally reprehensible. Let that child get some psychological care. He is not your leading story. Like, it was awful, awful. And that's all I really want to say about that. Okay, finally, I have to talk about something today. And, I have to approach this through the lens of the fact that how shall I put it? I get that people are seeking a means by which to explain the profound discomfort of the loss of the 2024 election. All right, so here's the context in which this arises. At least once a day now, someone on the Patreon feed asks me a question about whether or not I think the 2024 election was stolen. Okay, and put forward some crazy conspiracy theory that Elon did it. There's no evidence of that. That voting machines were messed with. There's only one lawsuit that's even challenging this, and it's in Rockland County, New York, and it literally is about the difference of like 5 to 10 votes in certain instances. That people have a theory that somehow Starlink was mobilized to do this. Okay, so I have to say something about this, and I've avoided commenting on this because you all know here I'm really about facts and evidence. Like, I'm trained as a trial lawyer. I don't like to comment on anything that remotely relates to conspiracy theories. Okay, so I've thought about this a lot because the question has come up so much. All right, and I'm just going to say this. There is a very uncomfortable truth about America that I think a lot of people don't want to face. And that is that the failure of this nation to redress its white supremacist history explains everything about how we arrived here. Okay, we don't need anybody to have stolen the 2024 election. Okay, the reality is here that if actual Reconstruction had worked after the Civil War, if it had not been abandoned and sabotaged by Southern white politicians, we would not be here. Okay, where we arrived at in 2024 is a direct result of the weaponization of white supremacist viewpoints in the United States of America. Full stop. Okay. And I know that it would be a lot easier to explain away the discomfort of how we arrived here by thinking that somehow votes were manipulated, erased, that databases were hacked, that those bomb threats that were called into a few lone voting sites somehow influenced people, Nobody wants to believe that all the swing states could have swung. I'm sorry. I have news for you. There are white supremacists everywhere. And unfortunately, the toxic brew of white supremacy and disinformation and propaganda are all the explanation that we need. Okay. One of the things I've talked a little bit this week about the way in which like certain things circulating in the information ecosphere have made me very nervous about what that induces in people from the standpoint of their own action. So this is a place where I start to have the same reaction. All right. Because one of the things that I think we have to face down here is that unless we can name how we arrived here, the truth of how we arrived here, we will never escape it. We have to actually deal with the fact that we're living under a fascist authoritarian government that managed to rise to power not once, but twice by weaponizing long-held intergenerational racism and white supremacy in this country. We have to be able to name that, because if we can't name it, we can't fight it, okay? And one of the dangers of like, I think Elon stole the election, I'll never believe that all the swing states went to him, is that you're doing two things by saying that. The first is that you're avoiding the true issues that need to be resolved in order for us to come out of this and build the nation that we've never been, okay? And the second thing is that you're telling people that their votes don't matter, that their votes can be stolen, that their votes will be erased, that there's no point in voter engagement. And that in and of itself is an incredibly dangerous line of thinking, okay? You put that out into the universe, you post it on social media, you will influence people to believe that their votes don't count, okay? And I will just say this, okay? I find it particularly noticeable that it is white women who are out there talking about the election having been stolen, because more white women voted for Trump in 2024 than voted for him in 2020 or 2016, okay? We have an obligation, if we care about the future of this country, to start actually focusing our work on our own, okay? Not running around with these crazy conspiracy theories that Starlink somehow swung votes in particular states, but to actually start learning how to have very difficult and uncomfortable conversations with other white women and white people about how it is that they voted for Trump and why, okay? How it is that white women have purposefully and intentionally used their agency to do that. And I don't want to hear any of this nonsense about their husbands voted for them. There may be random anecdotes for that, but in large part, it's bullshit. White women are responsible for our choices, right? And there is a desperate, desperate need for white women to be speaking to other white women, particularly those who have now gotten some inkling about how horrible this is, about how we arrived here in the first place. You are not going to get anywhere in terms of repairing where we are, digging our way out of it, building a better nation for future generations if you are running around on social media claiming that the election was stolen. And so I just have a plea, okay? Because I know that there are rabbit holes on the internet and terrible, manipulative people on YouTube in particular. I'm speaking to those of you who are patronizing tarot readers and spiritualists who claim to have all these crazy theories about how the election was manipulated. I am urging you to take a really good hard look at what you are giving permission for by refusing to actually deal with reality, okay? I really don't want to hear anything else about the election being stolen in 2024. I've said it so many times on this broadcast that I think it's a conspiracy theory that gets us nowhere. But I will tell you that I think it's morphing into something far more nefarious. And I think it's morphing into something that is actually complicit in the white supremacy that rose to the fore in an incredibly damaging and detrimental way through Donald Trump and his lackeys. Like, we have to actually deal with what got us here. And it's really uncomfortable and gross. Like, don't get me wrong. It's not easy to sit in this space of reflecting on the fact that the weaponization of intergenerational racism and white supremacy that has never been addressed in this country led us here. Okay. You have to be prepared to look yourself in the mirror, and you also have to be prepared to have really tough conversations. And there are lots of people who can train you on how to do this. Showing Up for Racial Justice, Surge, is an organization where you can start if you have not yet done that work already. All right. But I think for everyone who is out there thinking that somehow the election was stolen, it's really time to check yourself and to start figuring out how you're going to be a part of the solution instead of actually a part of the problem, and potentially a part of the problem for 2026. Because people don't vote. Like I said, people don't vote when they think their votes are going to get stolen. People don't vote when they think their votes don't matter. You have to start actually talking to people about why it is that we actually arrived here, so that people understand that if they don't vote, we're going to get this and a lot worse. So that's my 2 cents on that topic. And it felt like it was time to talk about it. And I appreciate all of you sticking around to listen to that. Okay, give me a thumbs up if you're still here. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Reminder, you can download our free guide on how you can make a difference now without burning out. It's linked in the show notes. It'll also be in the comments. Also, we are currently onboarding people for the Ripple Effect Institute this fall. That is our strategy incubator for people who are here to make big picture change, even in these incredibly trying conditions within their own zones of expertise. There's a link for a free strategy called below here if you want to learn more about that. Also, please, if you like what we do here, if you care about this broadcast, please become a paid subscriber at patreon.com/resistancelive. That is what keeps this broadcast afloat. It's what pays my staff. It's what allows me to show up here every day and still feed my children. It is not an enormous amount of money, but it makes a big difference every day. So please consider becoming a paid subscriber for as little as $5 a month if you haven't done that already, to help sustain this broadcast and the incredible team of women and one guy in Los Angeles who does video editing for us behind the scenes, who are helping to keep this work going. All right. Much love to everybody. I will catch you all back here at regular time. Don't forget, next week, the broadcast moves to an hour earlier. If you have not been here the last 2 days, you probably don't know that. We are returning to our original time of 11 a.m. Eastern, 8 a.m. Pacific, starting next Tuesday, the day after Labor Day. All right, my friends, I will see you back here tomorrow. There will be a bonus broadcast for Patreon subscribers tomorrow afternoon, and I will catch you all then. All right, take care, everybody. Bye.